Well, hello and welcome to our sixth installment, our sixth video of our mini intern build for Crash's Build Along Club. And with this one, we've got, at the point of this video, we have our airplane built. Our kit has been built and we're ready to cover it. Now, before we can start covering it, we need to go over all of our built surfaces, our built elements, and we need to sand everything. Now, I highly recommend that you use a fine piece of sandpaper. I am using a 400 here. That was the finest that I had. That's perfect for this. Now, the reason that I want to use a very fine sandpaper to dress all of these parts before we cover them is we could have little pieces of where we maybe used a little too much glue. You know, we're building this with thin CA, and if we've applied too much glue, like I can tell you I have done in a few places, well, we're going to have to sand that down nice and smooth. And if you use a very coarse sandpaper, then it's going to be very likely that you're going to sand the balsa around the glue before you actually sand the glue itself down. So I like to use a very fine grit sandpaper for this, especially on models like these where the just about the entire model is composed of 1/16 or 3/32 balsa. Very, very thin material, and it's just real easy to get carried away if you use something more aggressive than like a 320 or even a 400. So I've already done that. I've already dressed all the parts. I've got them all nice and smooth as I run my finger down it. This is actually a fun part. I've been building models for 30 years now, and the final sanding is actually one of my favorite pieces, parts of the work to do, because it's just, I don't know, I get satisfaction out of taking a piece of rough balsa with glue, high spots, and so forth, and then just sanding it to where everything is just so smooth and nice. As I've done here. And I don't know, I'm wired funny. But I want you to sand all those parts, use a fine grit sandpaper, and then use a tack cloth to get all the dust off. Now, if you were going to use a heat shrink covering, that would be most important. But, you know, we want to get as much of the dust off as we can. You can use compressed air, you can use a brush, you can just blow it away, and that'll do a pretty good job. Over the years, if I did not have a tack cloth that I bought at my paint supply store, oftentimes I would just take a paper towel and dampen it ever so lightly and just wipe across all the structure to remove the dust. That works pretty good. Now, after you've got your model components here all sanded, I want you to gather some materials as we continue on. Some of the materials that you're going to get of course, your tissue paper. Like I've showed you earlier when we first started, you're going to get, here's the key to it all, just your cheap run-of-the-mill Elmer's school glue. This is the white Elmer's school glue. Get you some of that. You're going to get a container. I've just got an old plastic bowl here, something that's expendable. I like to mix up glue and stuff in these plastic bowls, because once it dries, I can simply flex the bowl and all that dried up glue will crack away and it's ready for the next use. Get yourself a small paintbrush, or I like these foam brushes. Now, unfortunately, this foam brush is a little bigger than what I need, but it's all that I have right now. Simple, 1 inch or 3/4 inch brush would have sufficed nicely, but this is all that I had. Also, in addition, get yourself an old, perhaps an old bath towel or kitchen towel, because we're going to use that to soak it with water. So sand your model, round up these materials, and I'll meet you back and we'll start talking about how to cover a model with tissue paper. Okay, what I have here is I've taken my towel, this is just a normal bath towel, I've soaked it with water, I've folded it in half and then in thirds, and I have it sitting on top of my workbench on a garbage bag just to keep it from bleeding water onto my nice flat workbench surface. You may also want to use some wax paper. Sometimes as we start this process, a little bit of our glue is going to perhaps wick through the tissue and onto your surface where you've got it set up to dry. So I've just put some wax paper down. You may want to do that also. Now take your wood glue and go ahead and mix up about a 50-50 blend. When I say wood glue, it's just all-purpose school glue. Mix it up 50-50 with water and set that aside. And that's what I've done here. I've got a nice white, milky, glue mixture up here. Now, take your tissue paper. I'm going to do a wing first. And I don't know how well you're going to be able to see this, but with your tissue paper, you want to determine which direction the grain is moving in, is going in. I've done a little tear test, and that's a good way of doing it. Take a corner of your substrate and tear it. It's going to exhibit a linear tear characteristic when you tear it in the grain direction. And you may be able to see here that we've got a fairly linear tear this way, but when we try to tear it this way, well, it's kind of jagged. It does not want to tear straight. So I can tell from looking at this tissue that the grain is going in a direction this way. Well, when you're cutting out your pieces for your wing, you really want to pay attention to that grain direction so that you've got strength in that direction, because that's more important than strength this way. It helps to just bolster what the spar is already doing. Well, what I've done here is I have cut out a piece. And we're going to do the bottom of the wing first. And what I'll do is I'll open this up. I'll put my tissue down nice and flat. Now this towel is soaked with water, but it's not running. It's just got a lot of water in it, but it's not just overflowing. And we're just going to let that sit in there, and it's going to soak our paper. Now while it's doing that, we're going to come over here with our paintbrush and our glue, and we're going to start just painting just a light coat of this glue for wherever we know that our paper is going to come in contact. The tops of our ribs, the leading edge, the bottoms, I say the tops, these are all the bottoms because we're doing the bottom first, the bottom of the trailing edge. We're going to coat just a coat all the way around anywhere the paper is going to touch, and just a light coat at that. Now, because this is our center section of this wing, and it's going to be buried in the fuselage, we're just going to overlap our paper just a little bit over these center ribs. We're not going to try to cover this whole area. You could if you wanted to, but we're just going to do from this rib all the way out. So I'm going to set that up. I'm going to paint it off camera, and then I'll come back and place the paper on and show you that. Okay, with a light coating of our glue down, I'm going to carefully take my wet tissue. This is going to take probably a little bit of practice, but what we're going to do, we've cut it a little bit wider than what we had to have it, and we're ever so carefully going to just lay it down, and with your finger, just kind of dab it in place in all those places that you've glued. Just like so. I hope that's showing up okay on camera. It looks like it is. And I'm just ever so carefully making sure we don't have any wrinkles. And I'm just kind of trying to pull it tight. Now you got to be careful. This paper is real thin and it's wet. We're talking tissue paper. So, and it's, it's wet. So, I've just made contact with everything there. Right? Now at this point, I'm going to carefully lift it up and lay it down flat on my work surface. Now we've got balsa wood, balsa that is very lightweight, very porous, and very apt to warp when you introduce moisture to it. So I just like to use just some sockets, and just going to lay them down in a few places. And what we're doing is we're just making sure that we've got our wing nice and flat to our work surface. This provides just enough weight for that to hold. Now this is, all you guys out there that are looking for instant gratification, well, you've come to the wrong place. This is the kind of build that you got to wait on. So I'm just kind of pulling these edges up a little bit. But at this point, we're done. We're going to let this sit up and dry. That's actually that paper is going to dry. It's going to shrink up a little bit, and that glue is going to dry. And then what we're going to be left with is something that we could trim back, and then we'll be ready to do the top half. So I'll pause the camera here. We'll let this dry. You can expedite the drying time of this with like a hair dryer. I've done that in the past, but we're just going to let it sit here. Okay, during the break, you can see here that, instead of just doing one wing half, I've already done the bottom of both sides of the wing. Now, as soon as I let that dry, I took my X-Acto, and in this case, I use these little straight razors, but I went back and I trimmed all the way around all of our excess paper, and it worked really well. And furthermore, you can grab, I don't have it here on the bench right now, but you can take some sandpaper and sand those edges off. But what we've got here is the paper has shrunk down nicely, and we've got a pretty good looking tissue job there so far. So that being the case, I'm ready to do the top. Now you'll notice that this is just raw paper. This is very fragile right now. And we're going to do something to make that stronger. We're just not going to do it right now. We're going to get the whole wing covered before we go any further. So now we're ready to work on the top. Now in this design, I'm going to go ahead and do two different colors. One of the things that I noticed when Dave built the prototype for this kit, and I don't know how well you're going to be able to see that, but he covered in blue and yellow. I'm using, I'm going to use yellow and orange. But I like how the fuselage color, he continued on the wing in the center section. So I'm going to do that also. I intend my fuselage to be yellow, and the wings will be orange, and the empennage, the tail feathers, will be orange. So I need to grab some yellow, and I want to do that here. Now, I've got a printing background, so I understand how to lay colors so that you don't see gaps and you don't see any unpleasant things to the eye. Because of the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to put the lightest color down first, and then I'll put the darker colors down on top of it, and that will help us to hide the seam. Now, once you start working with this tissue, it's going to be fairly transparent, and you're not going to be able to hide that yellow beneath it completely, but, I'm going to make my best attempt at it. So the next thing I'll do is I'll cover the center section and do that in yellow, and then I'll do the rest of the wing in orange. Now be careful working with this, because this paper, like I say, this is tissue paper. This stuff is very, very fragile. And until we get it's shrunk up nicely, but until we put a protective covering on it, then it's going to be very fragile. It's very susceptible to putting a finger through it. Now, I don't know if this is going to show up on camera, but you may be able to see that this center section here is a little darker than the rest of it. You may also see on this wing panel that, oh my goodness, this trailing edge may appear to be a little darker than everything else. Well, let me explain to you why that is, because old Crash is impatient as heck, and I'm just having so much fun doing this that I picked it up off my work surface before it was dry. If I would have let it completely dry, I let it dry, 45 minutes, and I thought, oh, that's long enough. So I pulled it off the workbench, and when I did, it stuck to the paper, and it pulled the paper away in those areas. No problem, though, because I just cut another strip of my material and painted on a little bit more of that glue water mixture, and then put the wet strip that I'd taken, just patted it down in place and then let it dry. After we get our final coating on this, it's probably not going to be that noticeable. But I just wanted to show you, this stuff it's easy to work with. I take that back. It's not real easy to work with. It's a little difficult. But it's fun to do. Take your time, let it dry. If I were building this not for video, I would have already covered a whole bunch of the other pieces and been moving along with it. So anyway, now it's time to cover the top. Now I'm going to do something that I've never done before. I'm going to mix two covering techniques on this airplane. Now we've done it, I've shown you how to pre-wet the paper, right? And then we pre-wet that paper and put it on after we had glued the parts. Well, for the top, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to use a glue stick. And I'm actually going to I'm going to put the glue, let's say if I'm doing this outside wing, and we're going to achieve the same results here. But I'm going to just smear on this glue stick, just like a big chapstick. But I'm going to smear this on all of our spots where the tissue is going to come in contact, including the leading edge, all the tops of the ribs, the top of the spar, all around the edges, and all the way down the back end of the trailing edge. And then I'm going to actually put the paper on dry. I'm not going to wet it with my towel. Now this achieves a little different result, but I just wanted to show you the different ways of doing it. I have done a couple of models this way, shrinking it afterwards, but I have not done it. I've not done it in a while. I've not done any tissue covering in a while, but that is another way of doing it. Now to pull this off though, you're going to have, and I don't see mine, you're going to need to have a spray bottle, because after that dried tissue paper, after it dries, the glue joints all dry, then we're going to come back and we're going to mist it. And we're going to mist it with water to shrink the paper down. And you'll get to see that result. So I've got to round up some materials. I'm going to cut out all the pieces that I need, and then we'll do that in just a moment. Okay, I've cut a little strip here of yellow that I intend to put on the top as such. So I'm going to get my little, what is this? This is an Avery glue stick. I'm just going to get that, and if I can show you, just going to work a little of that everywhere that our tissue is going to touch the airframe. It doesn't take a lot, but it does take some. And across here. Alright, that's an old glue stick. I would probably expect that it would do much better if I had a fresh one. But anyway, I think we have enough on there. I'll work where you can see, hopefully. Just going to try to center that. And we're not stretching it. This is not iron-on covering. So we're just making contact with it. Now the drawback to using this is it takes a little longer before I'm ready to shrink it down, it's going to take a little longer for it to set up. Now I suppose something that I've been wanting to try, and I've never done it, but I would suppose that you can also get this same type effect by just using, again, our yellow glue, but we would want our yellow glue, our white glue. But I'm afraid that in order to do that, it would maybe draw a little too tight and put pressure on our paper. Anyway, there we go. I've got that in, and I'm actually going to do the same thing with the other wing halves. Now, this is not shrunk down yet. All it is stuck, and it's going to take a while for that adhesive to set up and dry nicely. But I'm going to actually, when I join you back, I'm going to have the tissue glued and dried to each wing panel, each left and right wing panel on the top, and then I'll show you how we can use our water. And I've just got an old hairspray bottle because it has a nice, instead of it being just a raw sprayer, it's more of an atomizer. So I stole this. A lot of guys say, oh yeah, take it from your wife. Well, you guys know me, I've got long hair. I have to use this stuff too. So take it for what you will, how you will. Anyway, this is just, I used it to have an atomizer. And I filled it with water. We'll put a little bit of alcohol in it. It'll help us to control the shrink. But we're not going to do that until everything is all glued in place. The dry paper has been glued in place and that glue has set up. And anyway, when I join you back, I'll have that done and we'll be ready to shrink it.